So my first question is, you wrote it as a thesis, but it was a bestseller in your country, which is quite unusual, and then it was turned into a play. So what does that make you? Are you an economist? Are you a philosopher? Are you an artist?
So good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here in Ljubljana. I always wanted to come here, but I never had a proper excuse until my good book got published here. So this is a good excuse. Yeah, this is sort of in some countries, for example, in Netherlands, I'm a philosopher, which is nice. And in Belgium, I'm more connected with the artsy people. And in Switzerland, I have very frequently theological debates, also in Germany. So it really depends on the time of the day and in which country I find myself. It was turned into a theater play, not by me. This was done by artists from Brno, which is a small town in Czech Republic. But they offered me if I want to play there. And when I was 7 years old, I wanted to be an actor, and in my life I managed only half because I became an economist. So I said yes. So then we toured not only not only Czech Republic, but many European cities with this theater play where I get to be playing myself, which is very easy and difficult. At the same time, you can't really hide behind a fictional character. But basically what I did in my book, I connected everything that I like. I connected economics with philosophy, psychology, mythology, theology, poetry. I put a Matrix into it and Lord of the Rings, and I mixed it somehow, and I thought I would be the only one who would enjoy this. And I discovered that there are many other people who enjoy this way of, thinking, perhaps.
Okay. So you say the purpose of the book is, I quote you, to look for economic thought in ancient myths and vice versa, to look for myths in today's economics. So which are the myths that you are talking about?
I start with the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is the oldest story that we have. In this story, there is not single times money is never mentioned, nor is there any violence in this story. It's actually quite a beautiful story if you think about it. But that would require a special lecture, so I will use, let's say, Christian stories or poetry or imaginary or mythology, which we know from the Bible, if I can. And show you what happens when an economist reads the story of creation. Yeah? So the fall of human being is the leitmotif of the story of creation, the story of Genesis, the story of about the Garden of Eden. And in traditional theology, the fall was associated with sex, for reasons unknown. Sex is never mentioned in this story, only once, and that's in a positive connotation. But as we all know, we are all tainted by the original sin because our parents, as hard as it is to believe, actually had sex before we were born. And just by this, quote and unquote, dirty act, we came to the world dirty, with the exception of, immaculate conception of Jesus Christ. So everybody else, there was sex involved. So this very strong belief originates from the original fall in the Garden of Eden. But when you look at the text carefully, the word sex really doesn't appear, but another word appears 23 times in 1.5 chapters, which is 2 pages of a book. And that's the word consume. That word is repeated 20 over times. Don't consume, it was nice to consume, she consumed, gave Adam to consume, Adam consumed, why did you consume? So, I mean, if you ask me, repeating one word 20 times on the span of 2 pages, that's bad literature. Until, of course, you have a point. So this is another layer of interpretation, the original sin. It wasn't a sin of sexual nature, it was a sin of consumption, because sola scriptura, they consumed something that they were not supposed to consume. And even I could say that it was a sin of overconsumption, because they didn't eat it because they were hungry or because they had to. It was eaten out of some sort of excess. So, and the curse that Adam and Eve receive is also economic nature, because it seems as if God is saying, because the enough that I gave you of everything wasn't enough, nothing ever will be enough. And this is, you can fast forward all the way to the year 2014, we still feel very similar to that story. That story suddenly has a huge relevance to us. And the curse is also interesting, the curse that Adam and Eve received after they were expelled from the Garden of Eden. You know, in economics, everything is about demand and supply. So Eve gets the curse of demand. You will desire, but your desires will not be with you, your desires will be elsewhere, your desires will be disjointed, they will be in control of you, you will not be in control of them. And Adam gets the curse of supply. You will work in the sweat of your brow, and even with the technology of the 21st century, with all the cameras and internets and Wi-Fi and hi-fi and Bluetooth, no matter how hard you work, it will not be enough to satisfy all the newborn desires. So exactly sort of a copy-paste of the situation today. Even according to many economists, this was one consensus that we had for in a long time. What led us into this crisis was overconsumption. So this is one way to spin the story of Eden that makes quite, I mean, at least for me, it makes economic sense. Another way to spin it is that even in the Garden of Eden, so what I do is I try to look for ideal places on earth and in the fantasy of mankind. So I search myths, I search stories, I look for how elves lived in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. And one of the most beautiful ideal societies is Eden. This was freshly created by God. Sin hasn't entered yet. There was enough of everything. There was only one woman in the whole world, which simplifies things tremendously, and only one man. So and you have a direct access to God, and He's walking and talking with you. Yet we read that the first feeling that Adam feels was loneliness. Adam felt alone. So how is this possible? God creates somebody, we don't know exactly why, but most likely to have a relationship. And in that relationship, one person feels alone. That's not a very good result. I mean, if my partner feels alone in that relationship, not so good. So as a response to loneliness, God creates him a helper. A suitable helper, but helper, which is a little bit weird. I feel alone, okay, here's an assistant, or some sort of a equal help. So so first Adam feels alone, and second he feels psychologically castrated, because obviously God is telling him that whatever it is that your job is, you need a helper. In other words, you're not doing your job well enough. You need somebody to help you. So the first situation that man finds himself is overemployment. The task that Adam had was higher than what he could cope with. So what's the point? The point is, even if we economically manage to reproduce the situation in the Garden of Eden, in other words, economically have abundance of everything, ecologically, this was a beautiful garden, still no CO2 emissions, psychologically, no Oedipus complexes running inside of your soul, theologically or religiously, direct access to God. Nobody will ever be closer to God than Adam, yet Adam feels alone. And the whole Bible is actually sort of a history about God and human being trying to sort of find the way, miserably failing every time. So if you feel alone in your life, it's okay. You know, relationship is an illusion of unloneliness. So, but this to me is even, you could even use this as a critique of Marx, because Marx, for example, criticizes that capitalism alienates human being from other human beings, and that it alienates the worker from the creation of his hands. These are the two basic alienations that Marx used to attack capitalism. My point is, well, you know, okay, but you are not attacking capitalism, you are attacking human condition. Alienation with the work of your hands, God felt that. He creates a human being, and that human being alienates himself immediately from the creator. So this was thousands of years before capitalism was even invented as a word.
So is that a condition of our material world?
It's a human condition that Marx could not solve by criticizing capital or changing the social structure. It is something that you feel and hear across all cultures. Even in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the alienation of a man from himself and from his fellows and from the work of his hands is quite evident. So it was an absolutely misplaced criticism, a mistake that should never be repeated.
Okay. Okay. Well, if I go back to your proposition that the original sin had the character of overconsumption, now you had some other thoughts around that which I found quite interesting. So you say we can even go as far as to say that discontent is the engine of progress and of market capitalism. And we are by far the richest civilization that has ever existed, but we are just as far from the word enough or from satisfaction, if not further, that at any time in the distinct primitive past. You say that demand simply creates more demand.
Yeah, we thought that demand wants to be satisfied. No, demand wants to be reproduced. This is actually, I have this actually interestingly enough from Slavoj Žižek, who says the original intent of desire is not to satisfy the desire, but newer and better desires. And you can see this quite nicely now that we have 25 years from the fall of the wall. This is a historical event that most of the audience, I can see, remembers. How many things did we desire 25 years ago? And today, do we desire more things or less things? Even though today we are unimaginably richer than 25 years ago, nobody had enough fantasy to just even picture a fraction of how affluent and effortless our lives will be, yet we are not, the set of things that we want is not smaller, but even perhaps bigger. So in other words, so let me now go from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew tradition to the Greek tradition. And in ancient Greece, there were basically two schools trying to answer the same question. You can see how Hebrews answered this question of discontent and how Greeks did. So the school of, so there was a basic agreement that, you know, and again, in economics, everything is about demand and supply. So I desire this, but my supply is here. Now, what to do? So hedonists or utilitarians had this program: if you want this much, but only have this much, then work harder so that you increase your possessions, your supply, until you have everything that you want to have. So supply should rise until it meets the demand. This was a school that we have followed for the last 2,000 years, more or less, but instead of supply, just add GDP, and this is the situation today. We still need this and this and this and this. That's why our GDP has to grow. It's even a religious belief of the society today. And at the end of the day, you will have a content person who has as much as he or she desires. Okay, so this was hedonists. And then you had the school of Stoa, who said, okay, we agree with the initial analysis, I desire this and I have this, how to solve it? Their answer was decrease your desires. And at the end of the day, you will be a content person. Now, this seems an easy thing to do, but it obviously requires something that very many human beings, or perhaps even all human beings, are unable to do. If you want to escape this into psychological or religious world and say, yes, I am that person, I am happy with what I have, congratulations. I think sometimes our prayer should be, may I desire the things that I have, not the things that I don't have, which is normally, once you have it, you don't want it anymore. It doesn't give you utility. But this is also true knowledge-wise. Nobody will admit that I have enough knowledge. Everybody wants to have more knowledge. Or if you ask the most religious people, I don't know, Saint Teresa or Augustine or whoever, are you spiritually grown up enough? They will always say, no, of course. The more I know, the less I know, and my heart will never rest until it rests in you. So it's a human condition recorded in the oldest of teaching, this engine that, it's an engine of discontent that drives you further. And it's okay, but if it's discontent, this tension between I desire and I have, that drives us forward, then we shouldn't complain that we are not content. It's one or the other. Either we're discontent and we use that as an engine and we should be grateful for our discontent, but you mustn't expect to be content. If you want to be content, then fine, but you are, then progress will be completely different dynamics. So my point here is that what we are actually expecting of economics to tell us today in the year 2014, philosophy or theology was already solving at the very beginning of their existence.
Okay. At this point, I would like to touch on an extreme that you mentioned in your book, and it was a very interesting example. That is Mandeville. You say that he actually claimed that greed is the necessary condition for progress of a society, sort of what you just said. And you say, according to Mandeville, we should be grateful to vice and immorality for full employment, lively trade, and the de facto basis of the wealth of nations. Now, would you agree with him? Because if I think, for example, how we calculate the GDP, where oil spills add to the growth of GDP, not to mention wars, for example, and many things which we value, like family and childcare, often don't contribute to GDP. So, would in that sense we agree with Mandeville?
Well, in certain points he is right, but fundamentally this argument, the argument is faulty before the brackets. This statement alone is valid, but it's the sort of the broken window fallacy. But let me maybe demonstrate a sort of another way of, an upgrade argument vis-a-vis Mandeville. Now, Mandeville was before Adam Smith, and Mandeville was the one who wrote a very controversial book called Fable of Bees, how private vice becomes public benefit. So this is sort of the pre-image of the invisible hand of the market. This is exactly the opposite of what St. Paul is talking about. The way the invisible hand of the market works is that you enter the black box with egoistic, malicious desires. Something happens in the black box and a good result comes out of it. This is the title, Private Vice, through the magic of the market, become public good, public benefits. Bad intent, good result. Ironically, this is the only combination that economics has focused on. We are trying to be we're trying to even be a rigorous science, which is funny, but let's say that we're trying to be a rigorous social science, or even better for me, rigorous humanity discipline. But surely there are other combinations as well. I mean, I want to do evil, it ends up well, or I want to do evil and it ends up evil, or I want to do good and it ends up good, and I want to do good and it ends up evil. So economics became sort of a cynical religion where we believe evil intent through the magic of the market will bring good benefits, and good intent, this is the traditional, the road to hell is paved with good intent. So it's an extremely cynical discipline where we only respect sort of egoistic intent, which my first point. My second point, we only study this one combination. We don't study the other combinations that are, of course, empirically likely. And this is where St. Paul comes in the letter of Romans. He says, I want to do good. I plug good intent, but damn it, I end up doing evil. So the Mandevillian invisible hand of the market is exactly the opposite. I want to do selfish. I don't want to care about anybody else, but God damn it, I did it again. I contributed to common good. But the way we grow is in a way interesting. I have this theory about the wave of growth, that a wave forms at the expense of the surrounding water level. So if you form a wave, the surrounding water level, of course, goes down. Now my question is whether our growth isn't a little bit like that. And I say, well, we have tunneled the past, fossil fuels, that is, in a way, solar energy of the past, conserved in petrol and in fossil. We are burning that. No generation before us burned that much of energy. And imagine how our GDP growth would look like without petrol and without fossil fuel. I mean, it would be no airplanes, no cars, very slow trains, or perhaps even no trains, and GDP would be basically much, much slower growing than it is. So that's one way how we are taking the energy of the past. We are also taking the energy of the future. This is how economies have been growing also, by debt. I take the money, this is the sort of the trivial argumentation, I take the money from the future and I invest it now, taking the energy from the future because sooner or later I have to pay back the money and the energy will be missing. So I'm taking energy from the past, we are taking energy from the future, we are taking energy horizontally. This is how Europe has grown. We have been a very aggressive superpower. Today, many Europeans think that we are the nice, postmodern, very sort of culturally sensitive, postmodern da-di-da-di-da, and America is the brutal, ignorant, imperialistic, local culture destroying, into capitalism enslaving ideology. To which I always say, as a European, I always say, yeah, but you're not comparing comparable. If you want to comment on America as a superpower, you should compare it to Europe when we were a superpower. We're no longer a superpower, so this is not really a fair comparison. What did we do when we were a superpower? We literally, intentionally, systematically destroyed local cultures, not by accident, but by a program. We literally stole the gold and silver, and we literally enslaved, not in some philosophical, sociological, oh my God, I feel enslaved by capitalism. No, we literally enslaved people who sort of died very often on the way in the ships that we were shipping in. So we were a very brutal superpower, and where would Europe be if it wouldn't be for this horizontal exploitation? But that happened in the past. It's also happening a little bit in the current, of course, not in such a violent form, but only one sentence because I really need to get to the point. International trade is very beneficial for the poor, yes, but it's much, much, much more beneficial for the rich. So a nice example of, this is a very trivial example, but it shows nicely how market structure works. Let's imagine that here in Europe, you are ready to pay 100 euros for a kilo of good coffee. Yeah, this is the price here, and this is, so now somewhere in, I don't know where, Africa, a local farmer is willing to sell that kilo of coffee for €1. Now, what should the price be? If the price that the poor guy gets is 100, then we as a rich society will simply have a wider variety of coffee, but it will be same price. In other words, we will save nothing, okay? I will still pay €100 for a kilo of coffee, but this poor guy gets 99 new euros because previously he only got €1. So the benefits of international trade will be with this person. If we say the price should be 50 euros, the coffee in Europe will be suddenly costing 50 euros, and that means I save 50 euros and I can spend 60 euros on cigarettes or alcohol or whatever. And this guy gains 49 euros. So that would be sort of, okay, that makes sense. But of course, do you know where the price ends up in realpolitik? The real price will be 1.0001. Why? Because we are price dictators. We can walk to somebody else. We are a monopsony. You can easily imagine this when you travel to a poorer country. Let's just imagine that you travel to a poor country and you go to the market and there is this guy who says, "So where are you from, my friend?" He is asking this not only to be polite, but also to determine your price level. Yeah? So you say, "I'm from Ljubljana." "Oh, okay, Ljubljana, so, okay." "Yes, so for you, special price, loaf of bread." What's a loaf of bread here in Ljubljana? I don't know, he knows. So you don't know, you don't do bread?
No, I bake my own.
You bake your own, okay. Do you sell it?
No, I don't.
No, okay. So let's say, I don't know, €2? Yeah? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So special price for you, my friend, €50. Good deal. And you know that the local price of bread is 10 cents in this poor country. And you immediately storm out at him and say, "You thief, how dare you try to cheat me? I know that normal price of bread is 10 cents and you're trying to rob me and sell it to me by €1.50. And this poor guy said, "No, but what do you mean? You've been paying €2 for a loaf of bread all your life. Now I'm giving you a nice little 20% discount and you are calling me a thief? Who's a thief here?" Okay, now philosophy and ethics to the side. Who will win? You will win, because you can walk to another. And you will walk long enough until you find the person who's willing to sell it to you for 10 cents. So the poor benefit from the international trade, but the rich or the powerful benefit much more. So that's the energy that we take horizontally. And then the last sort of energy of GDP growth is innovation. I call it vertical because it's like manna. It drops from the sky. Some years are better, some years are worse. And we invent the cell phone and GDP grows. Now, my thesis is that in 3 of these 4 dimensions, we are running out. We are running out of petrol and fossil. We have not run out yet, but we all know that we are, sooner or later. This is one argument that it took a long time for economists to sort of get the argument that if there is a limit of something, it will run out sooner or later. Also, debt is running out. Greece, even America, even European debt. We can no longer drive our economy on future money. Globalization has not run out yet, of course, but we know that it will probably not be as steep as it has been through our generation. And innovation, this is the only question mark. This will probably continue, but it's a hope. We don't know. It might just be that this is it. It will never come up with a battery that will last more than a day. Maybe. Of course, I hope, I believe, I pray, but it's a hope. And then there is so my thesis is here, of course, yes, our growth has been as a wave. We sucked the energy from these 4 dimensions, and they are running out. 3 of the 4 are definitely running out. That's why everybody's, even politically or economically, so much talking about innovation. This is the only hope that we know might carry for longer. And then I realized there's a 5th dimension of economic growth, and that's ourselves. Take an example of communication. 20 years ago, communication was a non-marketable dimension. In other words, when we talked, we didn't use money. Like you, when you bake your bread, you don't sell it, you don't buy it, you just do it for yourself. And it's very nasty of you because we don't see that in GDP. You know, you're stealing from Slovenian.
I buy the flour from.
Okay, at least the flour, but you know, you should really pay yourself for the work that you do.
That's a great
that
idea.
Would be nice.
I'll do that. Should I pay taxes on that as well?
Of course. And the value added, don't be cheap on yourself, you know. So, 20 years ago, communication was a private domain. It was not a domain of the market, so to speak. Of course, from time to time, we sent letters and we had a phone call, but 90% of the conversation was without the market. You didn't need money for that. Today, 90% of your communication, you need thousands. It seems easy to call my mother, who is, let's assume, in China, which is a nice thing about economics, you can assume anything. I am employing thousands of people just to make that phone call. And by the way, a small little thing, you're not talking to your mother. You're talking to a piece of technology. It sounds like your mother, but it's not your mother. You're actually talking to machines, you know. But what's my point is, this monetization or marketization of communication has, that's a terrible monetization of communication, has been a huge source of GDP growth. But it had a price. We pay for communication. And of course, this could be go on for dinners, for example. We still, like yourself, cook dinners. The moment we stop cooking dinners to ourselves, but we start selling dinership, GDP will grow. Cleaning of our homes, this is also going in the way of the market. Bringing up our children, etc., 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 etc. So that is a 5th dimension, I would say, selling, not in a negative way, but giving to the market what was not markets originally. So this is the fundamental characteristic of GDP. This is how GDP looks in the kitchen, behind the scene. In front of the in front of the curtain, thank you. In front of the curtain, it looks like our number, that Slovenia in 2013, we managed to do plus 0.7%. But behind the scenes, you see all these mechanisms going from the past to the future. It's a beautiful, multi-dimensional machine. So that didn't answer your question, but I hope it was at least distracting.
I forgot about the question.
Good. This was exactly my point.
Okay.
Good answer is that the person who asks the question forgets about the question.
Yeah, so you do suggest that actually we live in a debt age and that GDP is actually a gross debt product.
Yeah.
That we live on debt.
Yeah.
And you mentioned also about growth, but you do say that the problem with it's not capitalism as such, but it's actually growth capitalism, that growth is a problem.
Yeah. In my reading, this is not a crisis of capitalism per se, it's a crisis of growth capitalism. The real and only problem actually, really to economists, is that it doesn't grow. Everything else is... Now with Piketty and others, we are slowly opening our eyes and saying, oh, equality? What is that? Do you have a dictionary? What do these people want from us? In the past, they always wanted growth, and now the problem is that we can't come up with growth. So I gave this example today about this gross debt product. When I take a loan of 10,000 euros, only a fool would say that I'm 10,000 euros richer. You know, this is completely stupid to think that. You know. But when a government does exactly the same step, government takes 3%, borrows 3% of GDP, invests it or gives it into the economy, and the economy, let's say, next year grows by 3%, everybody, even Harvard, MIT, Yale educated economists stand up and applaud and say, yay, hallelujah, we are 3% richer. No, we're not. It's, you know, and this is where I suggest instead of GDP, gross domestic product, and I don't know how this will translate into Slovenian, but it's very funny in English. Instead of GDP, gross domestic product, we should keep the abbreviation, but we should call it gross debt product. And we should really rejoice. You know, hooray, our gross debt product has grown by 3%. So this is another way to show how we are fictionally taking energy from the future.
Okay, but you are proposing some solutions. You do have proposals regarding the GDP and how we should actually calculate it, and also on personal level, your Sabbath economics proposal.
Okay. Yeah, so my first question when it comes to GDP and all the happiness indexes and everything, of course, my first philosophical question is, why do we need to calculate it? I mean, at the end of the day, what good does it bring? Can I do a little test on you? Yeah. Okay. You personally, your personal GDP, in other words, your income, in the year 2013, first quarter to the first quarter of 2014, just the year 2013, let's keep it simple, inflation adjusted, did your personal GDP go up or down? Who knows? Did your income in the year 2013 go up or down? You know, you don't have to tell me, but just raise your hand if you know. So, okay, now, by how much? And I want it exactly. And I want it exactly like we do GDP, that means to the decimal point. Zero. Okay. Without decimal points. Does anybody actually know? I have asked now 3,800 people by now. I always, whenever the question comes up, I always ask, okay, let's really have a look on how GDP is really, really important and how much is mythology. And nobody knows. And my typical audience are auditors, bankers, advisors, financial people, people who deal with money on a daily basis, and they calculate GDP and GNE and inflation and all that doobie-doobie-doo 8 hours a day. Nobody, I've not met a person who would say, yes, my income went up by 4.2%. I've not met one. And then I always ask them, okay, so nobody knows. Now, ¿por qué? Why don't we know? Is it difficult? Is it technically sort of, oh, we're not sure. No, you just call your accountant. Of course, here, assumption that your accounts reflect the level of your income, which is, but let's assume that your taxes actually reflect your income. And you call, or you look on your tax return and you see, okay, last year this year this, divide one by the other and multiply it by 100. Everybody can do that. So that's what, 5 minutes? Look for the paper, 4.5 minutes, and then half a minute to do the very difficult mathematical calculation. What's my point? We don't know, not because it's difficult to know, we don't know because we don't care. We don't care. So this is sort of my little demonstration of showing on the personal level, which is much more important for you, your personal GDP, than some abstract GDP of Slovenia, which has quite frankly very little to do with you. Or even worse, GDP of Europe or of the universe. And what magic happens between when it's actually important and we still don't care, and then there is something happening, something I can't really describe. Personally, I call it fetishization. And that number for Slovenia or for Europe becomes something, if it falters a little bit, we dismantle European Union, or we kick Greece out, or we shoot somebody, or I don't know. You know? So this, to me, is my way of answering this, this weird thing called GDP. Now, I'm not saying that your income is not important. And I'm not saying that GDP is not important. I'm just saying that it's not as important as we think. So in your life, your income is important. Absolutely. In mine, absolutely also. Is it the most important thing in your life or in my life? No. It's importance, I don't know, priority number 7, 8, 9, 10 with our level of income. Even, yeah. So that's sort of a more fundamental answer to the GDP question rather than how to calculate it so that it involves, you know, the green trees and the pleasures of...
Okay. That's not what I meant with the question, but yeah, I do agree that GDP it shouldn't be as important as...
Yeah, let's keep the statistic, of course, but let's not fetishize it.
And you're actually saying that in economics it's become basically about econometrics, about mathematical calculations, and that it lost its soul in a way. So what do you think economics needs today anyway?
So this is interesting. I sort of hear the same complaint that we have from capitalism, also against European Union. The structure is there, the institutions are functioning, the bureaucracy is, you know, the law is kept, sort of, but the spirit is missing. And you have this against capitalism, and we have this also against European Union. So it's like a body without a soul. And okay, now changing the topic, we've done theology and blah, 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 blah. Now let's go to one of my favorite things is connecting high culture with low culture. So now let's plug in horror genre into this debate. Why horror genre? Because this is a very good example to show what happens when you separate a body from the soul. So in the classical horror movie, a body without a soul is a zombie. So the scary element is that my close friend, whom I've loved all my life and find her fascinating, suddenly is no longer herself, although the body remains, and she, usually it's a she in my case, always, attacks me. So you are no longer you, but you attack me. This is what, so the body of a zombie is very, very efficient. Why is it efficient? Because every adult has a basic dilemma. Do I eat or do I multiply? At the end of the day, you can shortcut all the dilemmas that an adult human being has to sex and food. Now, zombie is very efficient because this basic dilemma is non-existent. They multiply by eating. So it's, you know, it's a very efficient machine, but not efficient the way we would like it to be. And this is also sort of I use a lot of footnotes in the book because you can see that these, you know, everything is related. So a little footnote here is economics is all about efficiency, but the purpose is missing. If you ask me, is this pen efficient, I would, you know, try to write with it and I would say, yes, this pen is efficient because it writes well. But if you ask me about, is this efficient, and I don't know what it is, then I would say, well, in order to answer your question whether it is efficient, you would have to tell me what is the meaning, what's the purpose, what's the, in Arabic, in Greek, telos, what's the Aristotelian purpose of, and then, oh, this is not a ship, this is a lid. And let's see, oh yes, it is an efficient lid. Now the problem with economics is we ask about efficiency, but we don't know the telos, we don't know what the meaning is. So in other words, it's like a zombie that is very efficient at working, but the wrong direction. Or zombie is a very efficient tool, but yes. This is how we feel about economics today, that it's a very, very, very efficient body without a soul. But my point is altogether slightly more complicated, I hope. When you separate the body from the spirit, the zombie is not the only scary element that you get. You also get the ghost. And ghost is a spirit without the body. Now, ghosts, in all the horrors that I've probably seen them all, for scientific reasons. This is the beauty about my job. I can go midday into movies and actually don't have a bad conscience because I'm working. Ghosts work like this. They don't directly attack you. They just stare. Was I scary enough? No.
Well, no, don't.
Okay. You have to have a little bit. I would have to have a little bit of.
I think you've been too nice so far.
Okay,
so.
okay.
Yeah.
But spirits, the machine which spirits or ghosts use is blame. They just stare at you, and notice that in all these horror movies, it's basically a work with blame. They blame and they look at you and they drive you crazy. You jump out of the window, you slice your wrist, or doesn't really matter. Now, my thesis is in separating the body from the spirit, which was done both by technical men and by religious men. The religious spiritual despising the body despising the soul. We have in our culture divorced the two, so people read the Bible as a religious text that has nothing to do with actual technical functioning, and vice versa. We look on economics as a boring thing that doesn't have any ethical, that is full of ethical voids. Absolutely not true. These things will always have zero meaning, even the most brilliant theology or even the most brilliant mathematical economics. It will be meaningless. It will be absolutely harmful if these two are divorced. And one other answer, if I may, this is the most radical way of answering the question is, we don't have a goal for capitalism. If we had a goal for capitalism, I could answer the question whether it's actually efficient or not. We don't even have a goal for European Union, but it's a little bit easier there because with European Union, at least the founding fathers left us with a little bit of a goal, and that goal was peace through trade. That was the meaning, the purpose, the telos of European integration. So in the year 2014, we can actually sit down and say, do we have peace in European Union? Yes, we do. For the longest period of time in the history of Europe, we've actually had peace. No European Union country has fought other European Union country. Of course, there's been, all sorts of separate, but not a war. So mission accomplished. Question number 2. And mark here that the original founders had peace as the ultimate goal, and trade was what we call in philosophy the diminishing mediator, the vanishing mediator. It's just a secondary objective. We only use, it's a ladder. You don't use the ladder for the ladder's sake. You use the ladder to climb up to the tree. And once you, like Wittgenstein says, once you use the ladder, you let go of the ladder. You don't carry the ladder with you. So, trade. Do we have trade? Well, depends. One way to answer is yes, absolutely, we have trade. The north of Finland is trading with the south of Greece with an unprecedented ease. And I even put it in poetry. They even have the same currency. Finland, Slovenia, and Greece have the same currency. You have the same administration. You produce something that's good enough for Slovenia. It's good enough for Greece. It's good enough for Finland. This is, because I come from Czech Republic, and this is a country of Eurosceptics. And I'm sorry for spoiling it for everybody. I am the biggest Europhile in Czech Republic, which isn't all that difficult. But I am. And always people scream at me complaining about European Union, and I say, okay, we don't have time to go through all of your list of complaints, so pick the most important one, and let's focus on this one. Bureaucracy. I said, okay, bureaucracy, good. So, dear sir, or all of you here, how many times did it happen to you in your personal life that European bureaucracy has stopped you for 5 minutes? Can anybody, and so far I've not asked 3,800, but I've asked maybe 400 people, and nobody actually said, oh yeah, I had to fill in the question. No, European bureaucracy didn't stop anybody that I know or asked for 5 minutes. So again, this must be some sort of a myth, but this is a different topic. So we have peace, and we have trade. Now the problem with peace is that peace is a stationary quality, and you can't maximize it once you have it, and trade is not. You can trade more. This is the meaning of GDP growth. But one way to answering, this is, I repeat, this is the most radical way of answering the question, is I could say, yes, we have a depression from Europe. We have a feeling that the soul is missing because the goal has been accomplished. And if you want to go further, then we have to have new sacks for new wine. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So if I'm going to visit my grandmother, I can only take a car here, and from here I have to walk or take the stairs or do something. But I can't really blame the car for not being able to take me up the stairs. Now, the more difficult case with capitalism. Capitalism was not really constructed as carefully as European Union, so we don't know the aim, the meaning of capitalism. But let's just for a second assume that the meaning or the home run of capitalism is to make vast majority of people in a given society not having to worry about their existential needs. In other words, and that is my suggestion for a goal of economics. In other words, you can take your children to movies 3 times a month without worrying that at the end of the month you will have nothing to give them to eat. This I suggest as a nice sort of goal for economics or capitalism or whatever. If we take this as a work in progress goal, then also I'm afraid to say, well, in most countries, especially here in Europe, mission accomplished. Not in the poorer countries of the world. This is where we should, I think our happiness would be much better if we actually focused on somebody else than ourselves. It's very difficult to make a European child happy. You would have to give him, I don't know, a new iPod. It's very difficult to make a European child actually go, whoa. It's very easy to do that to a poor children somewhere in the other parts of the world. So to end the question, I was just in Austria, which is the country, in Altbach, and there was this forum, and I had a similar question. There were all these cows around me. It was a beautiful scenario, and I really love it there. So I said, it's a little bit maybe like a cow. You're milking a cow, and the cow no longer gives you any milk, and you start hitting the cow. Oh, you terrible cow. You're not giving me any more milk. And let's just imagine for a while that like in Oedipus, the cow opens its mouth and says, "But why are you hitting me? Look around you. Look at all the baskets full of milk. The basket that you're milking me is already overflowing. That basket is rotting. That basket is empty. I mean, that basket is leaking. That fourth one, you don't even know where it is. The fifth one, you've just kicked it over even without noticing. And I already gave you all my milk. Care for what you have. I can't give you any more milk." So this is sort of the most radical interpretation of why the spirit is missing, because it already fulfilled. And if we want to go further, we have to change the vehicle or change the purpose.